All right, class, go ahead and take a seat. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit differently that applies to geometry, but it's going to become more clear once we go ahead and get a little bit further on. But I just want to introduce you to the basic idea of trigonometry. And I know that sounds a little scary, but we'll do our best to make it easy here, nice and easy for you guys. We're only going to focus on the trigonometry of right triangles. So trigonometry actually comes from the Greek word. It comes from two Greek words. The first one, trigon, meaning triangles, and the final one being metric, meaning measurement. Okay, so trigonometry is used by mathematicians and other people that use math a lot in their jobs, such as engineers, architects, pilots, surveyors, and game developers, just to name a few, and I know you guys love games. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about simplifying things. We're just going to do right triangles. Now, what's a quick refresher, what's a right triangle? It's a triangle that has one 90-degree angle. Nice and easy, okay? So, remember that a right triangle, there's three legs of a right triangle. Now, we call two of them legs, and actually we call the third one the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse is always the longest angle, but we get into this a little bit more. First, I want to introduce you to three main ideas of trigonometry, and this is sine, cosine, and tangent. And you can see it right here, S-I-N-E, but it's also just abbreviated. Math likes to abbreviate a bunch into just sine, cosine, and tan. But the long version is sine, cosine, and tangent, or it's sine, cos, and tan. So, what this actually means is that for sine is the length. It's a formula, just like most other bit of math that we use. It's the length of the opposite angle, and I know you're having a little bit tough time. I wrote a little bit too small. The length of the opposite angle over the length of the hypotenuse. For cos, and guys, write this down, this is really important, is the length of the adjacent leg to the angle over the length of the hypotenuse. And tangent, finally, is the length of the leg opposite the angle over the length of the leg adjacent to the angle. And we guys know that this crocodile mouth basically is just angle. That's something that we've worked on before. So the next part that we're going to look at is we're going to talk a little bit more about what adjacent and hypotenuse means. So adjacent is always the largest leg of a triangle, and I put it out here. You can see this is a nice red 90-degree triangle, and you can see this line here is the hypotenuse. It's usually here. I mean, it can be flipped around, is whatever degree of rotation that this triangle is, but it's always the longest leg of the triangle, and it usually is in this position, usually, okay? The adjacent is the smallest leg. So now let's think about this. Let's think about this angle here. So when they're talking about this, we're looking at measurements of the angles. So when you go ahead and do it, the adjacent is the smallest leg of the two options that you have, and it's never the hypotenuse. So let's look at this one. So we know that the adjacent, we have to use the measurement of the adjacent leg. We know it's not the hypotenuse, so it's got to be this one. Now let's look at it a little bit differently here. I'll flip it upside down and look at it from the right triangle. So the adjacent leg is definitely always the shortest. Well, we know is always the shortest of the options. So it's either this option or this option. And usually when it's given, it'll give you a length, so you'll know exactly which one it is. But if not, you can kind of look at it and see that this leg, the base leg, is smaller than the height leg. Okay. So, once again, the formula is sin, which is opposite, over hypotenuse. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent, get this in here so you can see, is the opposite over the adjacent. Now let's look at this actually and how it works out. So I have a nice another right triangle here. Like I said, guys, we were just only going to focus on right triangles. So I have the point, I have the points marked here with B, C, and A, and you can see in lowercase letters I'm just using A, B, C to signify the legs, okay? So now, if we're going to do the sin of measure A, which measure A is right here, the sin is the opposite over the hypotenuse, okay? So the opposite of this angle is A. You can see that we have angle A here. The opposite leg from A, directly across here, is small case a. So that's A right here. So you put that on top. And then the hypotenuse is the largest leg, and we can see that's here. So sine of angle A is A over C. Now let's do the cos, and we're still hanging in with measure of angle A. is right here. So that it tells us it's the adjacent angle over the hypotenuse. So A is still here. We have the two legs that are closest to A are C and B. So the adjacent one is always the smaller one. And we know it's never the hypotenuse, so it's B. And we know that the next, goes on top, right here, B. And then we know that on the bottom has to be the hypotenuse. We already know that's C. So it's B over C. Now the last one is tangent, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So the opposite of A, which we already did, is lowercase a over here. And then the adjacent, which we already figured out in the last problem, is the bottom one right here. So tangent is A over B. Okay? So guys, what we're going to do now as a class, we're going to go ahead and go over a few of these problems. I'm going to write a few of them on the board and we're going to work on them together. I want everybody to follow along with me and write down everything that I write down in case I don't. And if I don't want you to write something down, I'll let you know. But other than that, raise your hands, ask questions, and we'll keep going on with this. Afterwards, we'll go ahead and work on a couple of worksheets. I want you guys to work together so I know that you guys are getting this. And other than that, please raise your hand. But here we go.